Yo, Andrew.
How's it going, buddy?
Good. How are you?
Good. Missed you. I feel like it's been a while since we recorded last.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Yeah, it's been
Nice.
like 2 weeks or so.
I feel like maybe I can't remember what the last thing we talked about was. So I'm still kind of tuned out from politics. There's a whole shutdown going on that I've been trying to pay attention to, but I kind of like it's kind of fun to see that they're floundering, but I think they just averted a shutdown. So we'll have to talk
It's
about
just
this
averted the
later.
shutdown. Yep,
But
I saw
we
that.
we have more pressing news tonight. We have our second ever special guest.
Yes.
Very excited. I don't know much about this guy, so give me a little intro real quick.
His name is Obi Ezeadi. He is a Westminster, Colorado city council member.
Okay.
And I've been doing photos for him for a couple months, just random events. But yeah, it should be exciting. I'm excited to have him on. Uh,
Nice.
Talk to him a little bit more about politics, where he's at, what he's going to do.
I'm gonna try to read the room, but there's a part of me that's like, since you're friends with this guy, I'm gonna assume he's a lefty. I don't know how far of a lefty he is, but I feel like three lefties sitting on here talking about lefty stuff isn't gonna work. So I wish I had my MAGA hat because I would slide on my MAGA hat just to give like a contradictory view on things. So I'm gonna try to kind of play that a little bit. We'll
You
see.
want to argue? You
I don't
want
want to
you want to
argue.
argue?
I just don't want to let views go unchallenged. So if one of you guys says something that's clearly like there's a Republican counter to, I'm going to spit it out. So we'll see how it
Okay.
goes. Yeah. So
I mean, I've never heard a Republican counter to anything from
maybe
Andy,
t
so
maybe tonight will be your first time to hear some good Republican counters. We'll see how it goes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right.
uh,
Well, here it comes.
all
Let's
righty.
do it. Hello, Andy. Hello, Obi. I want to introduce everybody to Obi
No,
Ezeadi.
I thought for sure
And
you were going to say it wrong.
uh, after I just asked, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I want to start out actually just by asking Obi, just to kind of introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about like where you got started and what your role is currently.
Yeah, so my name's Obi Ezeadi. I'm a city councilor in Westminster, and I got into politics really in 2021, right after the insurrection. So when the world was on fire, I realized that we didn't have enough leaders in the world, and that's when I raised my hand. And up to that point, I had worked throughout the private sector. I've worked in healthcare and transportation, in real estate, um, in various capacities. I'm a board member of several nonprofits locally, and I still didn't feel like I was doing enough, right? I wanted to contribute more, and I grew up really poor. So I grew up throughout my childhood with very little, going to bed hungry and just seeing a lot of trauma and destitution that no one, deserves to see that and that people still see and are trapped in these communities. Um, and in 2020, when we were in lockdown mode, that's when it really started. I started to think through what is how am I helping? How am I helping to pull people out and to become stabilized in their lives? Like for me, it was luck, right? Luck that got me out of it. I got my education and worked and just kept going through these motions that I saw each step of the way was just very tedious and unusually difficult, and what most people need is really um, what I call it is a trampoline, where in government, there's this big ideology difference between folks who believe that government is here to build hammocks for you, right? Versus folks who are like, no, no, we're not trying to build hammocks for people to just lay in and receive resources. What we're trying to do is build trampolines. I think people throughout their lives need that boost to become self sufficient in the long term. So when the insurrection happened, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I started researching city council, and the rest is history.
So I got
Nice.
to jump. I got to excuse me, jump in real quick here. I love your trampoline analogy, real quick, because I'll tell you this: I was a longtime Republican. I was never that into politics, but if you would have asked me, I'm a Republican. I'm from Texas, and I like George W. Bush. I was that kind of guy. The Trump years kind of made me start paying attention more, and I would say I'm an independent now. I definitely voted Democrat the last two elections. I did not vote in 16 because I lived in Texas, and it was clear Trump was going to win, and I was one of those people that says with the Electoral College, my vote doesn't mean anything in Texas. So that was kind of how I lived most of my life. But a Republican criticism of Democrats is, the social safety net, and they're trying to encourage the welfare state and all that. And I've never heard it explained in the trampoline versus the hammock argument. So I'm going to steal that from you because I feel like it's meant
Please
to
do.
it's meant to kind of help people bounce back from a low point and get them going in the right way. And the way that Republicans always attack Democrats is that no, they want to keep people depending on the government. So I love the way you said that. The other thing I just want to say real quick, lockdowns of 2020 were kind of a fork in the road moment because a lot of people either got active in kind of an anti-Trump mode or they went the QAnon route. But everybody's staying at home watching the news or YouTube all day long. It was kind of like those. It was one of two paths. Either you were going to go extreme right wing or get vocal about what's going on in the world that you don't like politics wise. So I'm glad you got into it. It seems like you got some pretty good messages from what I've seen of you just in a little bit of research in the last day or so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one of the
and sorry, just
go ahead.
to what you were saying about even the Bush days. Bush now seems pretty moderate now, right?
Dude, I say that.
So like Bush maybe wasn't that bad.
Dude, I say that all the time. Even Mitt Romney in 2012, everybody was painting Mitt Romney to be the worst thing ever, and it's like I'd happily take Mitt Romney right now if that's what the Republicans were putting up. I wouldn't fight it at all compared to what we have now.
Yeah, and what I think is happening is there's a crisis of messaging, right? Like even just the trampoline thing that I said, I think we have a lot of folks in politics on both sides that just have lost their way. They don't know how to connect with people anymore on a human level, and they're not reading the room, right? So Democrats like to speak at you, and they believe that they're smarter than you, right? That they know more than you.
I'm going to jump in after this. Docs, you're not going to get to talk tonight, Docs. I got some stuff.
That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
And then Republicans on the other side, they talk down in a way that they really they devalue people's intellect, right? They think that if you want to have a beer with them, that's enough. Mm-hmm. But I think there is a middle ground where we can respect people's natural intellect to understand policy and understand what's good for them and their own choices and to make their own choices, right? And I think that word choice is actually on both sides. Both sides are reducing your choice. On one side, it's more so, no, you have to choose Democrats because we know best. That's a reduction of voters' choice. On the other side, they want to reduce, they want to really limit what you can read, who you can love, the choices that you make, your personal freedoms. So I think that side is worse, to be clear. However, there is a messaging crisis, and I think we need a unified communication strategy to present to local media, to constituents, to really frame this regional necessity of collaboration that we need to get back on. This need of, actually, there is a huge economic crisis, whether Democrats want to believe it or not. It's true. People are suffering, working and middle-class people are suffering more and more each day. The fact that you ignored it is why you lost, right? And on the other side, it's actually, you can frame your economic argument, the kitchen table argument, without reducing people's freedoms, right? I think we can do both, meaning neither of those things, but do both in terms of giving people choice and addressing their actual needs versus all of these culture wars that we've started.
So real quick, in the I believe you call it the argument triangle. I watched a little video you did on that.
Yeah, so thanks for watching that.
I have a little list of some things I want to talk to you about tonight, and the argument triangle is going to apply to Docs here because You mentioned kind of the way that Democrats speak to Republicans and the way both sides speak to each other. And we've hit a point where we don't really have good conversations anymore. Nobody approaches it the right way. It's, oh my God, you voted for Trump, you're a Nazi or whatever. And you kind of, people go, they attack right away, which puts the other person on the defensive. And at this point, no information is going to be shared. Nobody's going to listen. And I thought the argument triangle, when I saw that, kind of it made a lot of sense. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But on messaging, the very first thing on my list that I kind of had was just overall the Democratic messaging is terrible. And I hate to be hating on Democrats, but it started in the first one I remember having an issue with was defund the police. And defund the police was a terrible branding issue. If ever you could explain, because I eventually watched something where it was a video explaining, here's what we mean by defund the police. We need to rethink the way we do policing in America. And everything about the video sold me on, oh, that's a good idea. But the name defund the police is terrible. That's too easy to be used against you. And that was what, 2020, 2019, the George Floyd days. Now in 2024, Democrats really sat back and let Republicans define what Democrats are about. And to a lot of people that aren't, they don't watch the news, they watch social media influencers, which is a big problem in my opinion. They watch TikTok. But I would have people tell me like, "Oh, I couldn't vote for a Democrat. All they care about is," and then they'd list, trans men in women's sports, or a bunch of stuff that Kamala was not talking about at all. Like if you listen to what Kamala said, she was running on a better economy, helping small businesses, lifting up the middle class, all these things. But most people did not know that because Democrats kind of, I felt like they were afraid to go into hostile territory. Like there was the whole should she go on Joe Rogan thing. I don't want to get into that. But one thing that
Well,
I liked
I
about,
want to step in real quick on that
go
because
for it.
I think that's one of the failures of the left in the last election was Trump was willing to go on all these podcasts that reached millions and millions and millions of votes or people, more than the traditional media platforms that the left just kind of plugged
Yeah.
into this last election. And I just recently saw, I think Bernie was on one, AOC was on a left-wing podcast, and they're actually, I think they saw the light and they're actually starting to do that. And
But
that's where you can get your message out and like actually have a conversation as opposed to the five questions that you get on CNN throughout a 15
yeah,
minute interview, you
what
know?
real quick, they went like Biden did a very left-leaning podcast. I didn't see what AOC did, but I'd like to see them start going into more hostile territory because the Republican machine, and I don't think it was so much Trump, but the Republican machine won the messaging battle in this last election, and a lot of people voted and were like, "Yeah, I'm voting Republican, and I love it." And then if I could get them and explain to them, like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" and really like break down the border, like we can't seal the border. We need some immigration. We need immigration reform. We need more immigration judges faster, getting through the system. When I would explain that to Republicans, they'd go, "Oh yeah, no, I agree with that." And it's like, well, then you agree with the Democrat stance on the border, but they don't know that because nobody can get through to them, which takes us all the way back to the argument triangle. You got to find a way to approach it from a soft space and don't attack them. And the couple people that I've been able to get a hold of and really like explain things to them, it turns out they're like, "Oh yeah, I actually agree with that." It's like, yeah, that's Kamala's stance. So
Well, I
real
also
quick,
I also think that I think some of these left-wing platforms they actually have hard-hitting questions. Like when they have right-wing people on or left-wing people, they actually ask them solid questions,
yeah.
um, as opposed to like the Joe Rogan
The
who's just gonna sit there and listen and shake his head yes.
the problem is no Republicans are watching that left leaning podcast. So you gotta reach the people where they are, and the votes we need to change are over there. Now, real quick, Obi,
Yeah, so
go
but
ahead.
just to that point, like so politics is all about choices and voices,
Okay.
right? And if you don't get your voice out, so what we have right now that I think on the Democratic side, they haven't realized yet, right? But I think Republicans did crack this in a way, maybe not intentionally, but the way it all worked out. What we have is a internet first disaggregated media ecosystem,
Okay.
right? And it's focused on virality. So if you're not able to get your content in front of the viewer, no one will hear your voice, right? So the trick is to piggyback persuadable information onto viral content.
Okay.
And that little piece right there is what Democrats haven't realized yet. And that's why they should have gone on all the podcasts, go on everything, right? Because what they were doing is they built these echo chambers online, whether it's Instagram or TikTok. There are these algorithm echo chambers where they talk to themselves, repeating the same messages, and then they got surprised that they lost. Well, that's because no one heard those messages, no one outside of their algorithm, right? So that's the problem. And if we have leadership that understands that you have to piggyback this information onto virality in this disaggregated system, because no one's looking at newspapers anymore. No one is watching cable news at night to find out what's happening, but we're still stuck in that past.
I watch a lot of cable news, is all I'm going to say, but I'm definitely rare. I watch too much CNN. Now, Obi, real quick, you are a first generation American, is that right?
Yes.
Where are your parents from?
Nigeria. So Nigeria. I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska. Yeah.
Very nice. So one of the things that I was kind of saying a minute ago, it takes guts to go into a hostile area, a hostile environment media wise, to go on Joe Rogan. That's, for Kamala, that could be a trap. I get how it's scary. The thing that I thought was really neat about your story was if I was going to jump into politics, and let's say I'm going to be a Democrat jumping into politics, I would try to find the safest blue district I could, a place where I think I really have a shot to win. You decided to run for city council, and from what I'm hearing, I don't know where Westminster is, but it's a very white town, right? You were only the second black.
Yeah, it's about 1.6% black, but it's about 20% Latino. But yeah, it's majority white, and it's fairly conservative.
Was there any part of you that thought about going to a safer district if you wanted to get your foot in the door politics wise, or were you just like, this is where I live, this is where I want to make change?
No, because I hate those kind of politicians, right?
Okay.
They're called carpetbaggers. That's the term. The term, because what they do is they'll travel and they'll move their whole family just to be in a safe district. That's not, that was never an option, because I think that is just part of the reason why people don't trust government. Yeah. And my whole ethos for coming into politics was, how do I build trust? We need to rebuild that trust. I don't know. I'm not sure if it ever existed, right? But we need to build trust between the people and the government. And that's at all levels, whether it's city council or county or state or federal. We need to build that trust, and we haven't done that. And we break it every time we do things like that, right? Moving or asking for salary increases for ourselves, right? Or just not even door knocking during the campaign. Many don't door knock. They just spend money. They'll flood your mailbox with mailers and call it a day. So they'll never actually get to meet face to face. And that's why they're so bad at messaging. Mm-hmm. Most politicians are so bad at messaging because they never get the practice to even try, because they don't have to, because our campaign finance system is a mess, right? Well, at all levels.
Without ever being in politics, my view, and this might be skewed, but my view of it is, I think there's a lot of people that start like you with I want to make a difference. I want to have town halls, and I want to hear from the people. And then they get in and they start realizing that there's a whole, you gotta go along to get along type scenario. The thing that you mentioned, mistrust in the government, we have some upcoming Democrat kind of stars like AOC that give me hope for the future. And then we had this deal, I think it was just this week, where in order to get a committee assignment, she agreed that she would not primary sitting Democrats anymore. And it's like, no, that's the wrong move. But she just, she wants to be the head of the House Oversight Committee, or the ranking member. So she's got to give a little to go up. And it worries me, because I wonder if the system is so corrupt that even though we might have a lot of people starting with great intentions, by the time you hit a certain point, you start to have to compromise your values to continue to move forward. And whether that means voting a certain way for the lobbyist that's putting money in your pocket, or whatever it is, I don't like the thing the Republicans are doing right now, where it's like, we just got to burn it down. Like, burn it down. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that extreme, but I also worry to a degree. Man, this system seems so broken. I don't know how you get that out of it. Like, I don't see campaign finance reform, like meaningful reform, is not going to happen as long as the people in office are the ones that have to vote on it happening. They'd be voting to take a pay cut, and that scares me.
Well, since there's always multiple paths to solving an issue, right? And you're right. There are lots of paths that we know should happen, but probably won't happen. So the path that is open though, is the path that I've chosen to kind of focus in on the last 4 years since I've been in this. And that's, how do we activate people?
Okay.
So if the system is a mess and we can't change it, what we can do is change who controls it. And I think we activate the reason why we have all these folks in office that we don't like, for example, is because we don't have an activated electorate. People don't care about city council, don't care to vote about on city council ballots, county ballots, even state ballots. The turnout is 10%, 15%, 20%. Everyone votes in the presidential election and they think they're doing something, right? But actually, that's probably the least important, honestly, and that's not hyperbole. That's probably the least impactful office to vote for your daily life.
Yeah, and that's
the
because
most impactful is actually city and state, but no one knows that, and they're not, so they tune out.
well, and
It
because of
starts
what
at
you're saying
home,
with
right?
the well, yeah, and with the low turnout, that's how groups like I'm in Oklahoma, so right now Moms for Liberty is a big pain in my ass, and they keep putting up candidates that when I first see the candidate and I look into him, I'm like, oh, this person's nuts. Like, there's no way. And then they win a seat, and you find out they won a seat on the local city council or the school board or whatever it is because the turnout is so ridiculously low. Our state superintendent right now is trying to make the individual city superintendent positions something that is voted in instead of appointed by the school board. And Moms for Liberty is just chomping at the bit because nobody's going to show up to vote for that except for their fired up group. And if we could figure out how to solve that, how to get people vote, and I think mail-in voting, the way you guys do it in Colorado, is probably a great start. But that's one of those problems I
So
don't see a
even in
solution for.
Colorado, right? So even in Colorado, where we have the gold class, the best in class voting system in the country. People get their ballots automatically. You're automatically registered. You get it in your mailbox. You basically don't have to do anything but open up the letter, vote, and you mail it back, right?
Don't
And
forget to
people
sign the
still,
envelope.
and you sign, and people still don't vote.
Yep.
Think about that. It's the easiest in the country, and it's still a task to get people to care to vote down ballot because of many reasons. But because we don't have that, just on the voting side, my big focus is actually on the other side. It's running for office. It's getting more people to run for office. That is a larger lift, as you can imagine, right? If people aren't even voting, why would they want to run? So I try to be the example for them, and all I do, I think, the last 4 years has been trying to get people to realize that they can do it too, and it's not hard, and to train them and give them the knowledge and the wisdom to do it.
I
So
saw
how
that
do
you
we
have,
get people to vote? I mean, like how do we get people, like, is it that they're just not interested? They're just like, I don't really
But
care,
it's two
or
things. There's two things. One is get better people to run. So a lot of people don't vote because we have shitty. Can I curse on here?
yeah,
I can't
for
believe
sure.
you just cursed. No, I'm kidding. You're good.
We have shitty candidates all the time,
Mhm.
whether they're in office running again or new people running, right? And by shitty, what I mean is they don't know how to inspire, they don't know how to message, like we've talked about. They don't have values or a foundation of what they believe in. They say what they think you want to hear, or what politicians tell them to say, or what the party platform is, right? They'll say the standard stuff, but voters can tell pretty easily and can filter out pretty easily the fakes. And I think a lot of them don't even try to reach out to you. So like I mentioned, most don't even door knock or contact voters. So I'm actually not blaming the voters for not caring. I think it's all of us. It's the system, it's the candidates, we don't give them a reason to vote. They don't see people that have lived their lives, right? They don't have folks who are coming to the door saying, "Hey, I've worked 3 jobs just like you. I raised a kid going, doing my MBA just like you, and I started the business just like." They don't have those people coming to their doors that can connect with them. So all they do is they get this letter, the ballot, and it has these names that they've never heard of, right? Because no one has ever, because the outreach is not there. So it's not their fault.
Well,
No,
and
and
this is one thing that I really like about like coming out and photographing you and hanging out is like you're constantly introducing yourself to people, like talking to them, shaking their hands, introducing yourself and telling them who you are and doing an actual service for the people of Westminster. Um, it's inspiring. It really is.
real
Well,
quick,
thank you.
you have a daughter, is that correct?
Yes,
How old is she?
she's 10,
She's 10.
Gracie.
Okay. So she was 5 or 6 when maybe 4 or 5 when you decided you were going to run for office, right?
Yeah, this is 4 years ago. So she was 6.
Okay. So because my thing is, I've talked about, and I think I've talked to docs about this. Like, I hit a point around the same time as you where it was like, I just want to make a difference. Like, and my thought was, I'm going to get on the city, or sorry, the school board, the local school board, and just try to start where I can help there. I started seeing the different Moms for Liberty groups taking over local school boards, and it's like, I want to stand up to them. But where I'm at is I'm in an incredibly red area. Like, my whole state's
Where is
red.
that?
So I'm in Oklahoma, and I'm gonna leave the specific city out, but the whole state's red. But I'm like the darkest shade of red on that state. So I'm outnumbered big time. And like just the thought of saying like, "Hey, I'm gonna run for office as a Democrat here," oh, like that would scare the heck out of me. And I'm sorry to say this bluntly, but like as a white guy who looks pretty MAGA, honestly, like that would scare me. You as a first generation American in one of the whitest cities in Colorado, I guess, and deciding, you know what, like I'm just saying, I commend you for that because you got a wife, you got a child. I saw one of the stories where you received a little bit of hate. I'm gonna say, Instagram mail and whatnot. But I wonder how many good candidates we're losing that maybe tinker with the idea of running and then say, no, I'm not going to put my family through that, or I'm not going to put myself through that, or whatever, because you're putting yourself under the magnifying glass and to a degree. And for president, for example, it's like every election we say, oh, these two, don't we have anybody better to run for president? No, we got a lot of people, but they're not going to subject themselves to what they have to go through to be president. And that's, I think, part of the problem.
It's definitely the problem, and especially when you have just basically most of the folks who run are wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Wealthy doesn't mean millionaire, right? It just means you have more than you need, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that seems like a low bar to reach at this point. But that's how bad our economy is because we have this wealth disparity, right? So because of the wealth disparity, the top owns all the money, and the bottom 80% actually is more than that. We're all scrapping for the rest. So just having more than enough means you're wealthy in this day and age, and those are the folks who run for office
So
mostly.
real quick, are you trying to say that you don't think putting all these billionaires in charge of the government's going to be a good thing? I was told by many Republicans that this is going to work out great, putting Elon Musk and everybody else in charge. You're saying that's not a good idea?
I'm absolutely saying it's not a good idea,
Okay.
and so I know that was sarcastic, but
Yeah.
the wealth when you have wealth, so it's even worse when you have wealth, but you use it not to elevate the voices of marginalized communities, right? You use it not to create jobs, not to talk about affordable housing policy, not to implement healthcare or human services, but you use it for more tax cuts for
Hmm.
yourself, for millionaires and billionaires. They use it to tell you, like I said, what to read, who to love, dictate when you can have a baby. They use it not to help you, but to control you. And that's even worse than just having a bad candidate win.
Well,
It's worse when you have someone with the privilege to actually do something and use it in the right way and they don't.
so, and real quick, the main there's one part of me that still leans right, and I'm a deficit hawk. I don't think we should spend more than we take in, and I think that $37 trillion in debt roughly is where we're at. I think that's a major problem. The thing that finally, and I don't know how it took me so many years to kind of wake up to this, but Republicans scream about the deficit in the budget whenever Democrats in office. when they finally get in office and they have a chance to address it, the first thing they do is give a big tax cut to the top 1%, which only increases the debt. And it was weird because it was during the first Trump term when I saw this, and I kind of it clicked for me. I was like, hold on, wait, if we owe all this money, why are we giving tax cuts? And as I try to explain it to people, for whatever reason, people that are in I'm lower end of middle class, is what I would say I'm probably am. And people around me in my group are like, no, we shouldn't be charging these billionaires so much. And it's the weirdest thing that people in my tax bracket are defending the billionaires. And I don't know how we've hit this point of being brainwashed, but like we're there. I don't know how we fix that. It worries me.
Well, it's even more worrying because when we talk about the deficit, and by the way, I'm on that boat of we need to figure out how to get back in line, right? It's way out of hand. But if you look at the past since Reagan, and I've talked about this too online, since Reagan, the only presidents that have reduced the deficit are Democrats.
Yep.
The only
Clinton's the last one.
So
Clinton had a surplus, right? Obama reduced it. Biden reduced it. Republicans are the ones who, whenever they're in power, I mean, look what's happening now. Just yesterday, Donald Trump said, no, shut down that bipartisan deal that you've been working on for months and months to keep the government funded, right? Shut that down. And when you make a new bill, I want you to get rid of the
debt ceiling.
The debt ceiling, because he wants to be able to spend however the the billions and trillions he wants, because he knows his tax cuts for the rich that's coming, more tax cuts. By the way, we are still under the 2017 Trump tax cuts for the millionaires. We're still using that. That's the tax code that we have. He wants to make that even more. He knows that's going to he has to pay for that somehow, right? So it's much easier if you can just not have a debt ceiling and just be able to cut for the rich as much as you want.
Well, and he didn't want to have to explain to Republican voters why they were voting to raise the debt ceiling under his watch. That's why he wanted that. But now, I don't know if you guys have seen, but they actually did pass a budget or a continuing resolution tonight. And Trump had said, do not pass it unless it has he wanted to suspend the debt ceiling till 2027. And just so you know, the one they passed did not address the debt ceiling. So he's still going to run into that in June or July this summer, I believe, is when that becomes an issue. So,
and it's still not passed. The Senate still needs to approve it. Biden still needs to approve it.
Yeah.
Right. But like, that's the privilege and the gall that we're talking about. He's not even president yet, and he's shutting down governments.
But I will say I'm hopeful that already the Senate has kind of bucked what he wants a couple different times. He said he doesn't want background checks for his cabinet members and all that, and the Senate's they got a little bit of an ego, and they're saying no, we're gonna go through the process. So I appreciate that, even the Republicans in the Senate that are doing that. But even the House, he said everybody vote for this bill, and 37 or 38 of them did not vote for it yesterday. And then today he said do not pass it unless it involves suspending the debt ceiling, and they did not do that. So Congress is kind of barely standing up to Trump right now, which is more than I thought was going to happen. So I'm a little hopeful. I think the Senate is going to stand up more. I don't think the House is going to do a whole lot. But the House under Republicans can't govern is all I'm going to say. They can complain a lot when they're the minority, but when they actually have to start coming out with budgets, they haven't come out with a budget. We're doing continuing resolutions on the Nancy Pelosi 2022, I believe, budget. We've done that the last 2 years. Like, they can't govern. So I'm not terribly worried about any legislation getting through in the next 2 years. I think that Democrats probably retake the House in 26, but in the next 2 years.
And to what you said earlier, right? So you were thinking of school board. What the Republicans have figured out is, because they lose a lot federally, right? At the federal level. Trump was kind of an aberration, where what they've been doing though is saying, okay, the best way to control you is through fear money and running for local office, right? So they've been running for the school boards, they've been running for county commissions all over the country, city councils, and like I said, that's what I think about before I sleep at night. That's the stuff that keeps me up, is these other levels, because those are way, way more important than the presidency. And people don't realize it. And it's easier for them to get in those and make crazy changes, especially
Well,
school boards.
and I don't
Okay.
know what the official role is, but the people that are in charge of counting the votes during elections, after January 6th, there was like a 3-year period from January 6th to this most recent election where it turns out a bunch of January 6th supporting type people, election denialists, whatever you want to call them, suddenly they were the heads of the elections in their counties.
Oh yeah.
All right, did either one of you guys? I got one thing I want to end on, but do you guys have anything that we haven't covered that you're really looking to cover?
Um, Obi, do you want to tell us what your next moves are? Is this public information already?
Which part? Oh, the firefighter
Yeah.
thing. Yes, sure. Yeah, that's public. I'm currently in training to become a firefighter. That's something that I think my career has led to over time. And, I started in the private sector, moved to the public sector, and just gotten closer to the community. But what I've never done is frontline. I've never been on the front lines, and I think that's the most impactful way of impacting a community is right there. That really excites me. That's something that I think, the 9 to 5, sitting at a desk or working in the company. I've built companies for myself and others. I've worked all over these various, worlds and past lives, right? But what I have never done is actually help people with my hands on the front lines, and I think that's my next step. So I do plan on staying in politics. I will be doing both.
Okay.
And it's a long road before I become a firefighter. So I just passed my CPAT, my physical test, a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago.
Congratulations.
That was the hardest part, I believe. Hopefully, that was the hardest part.
Well,
Maybe the fire academy would be hard too,
yeah,
but
Academy's gonna be rough.
that was hard for me psychologically because I'm 40 years old now, and I didn't know if I could still do it, physically, because it's a very taxing. It's a 10-minute. It's timed, a 10-minute time test, and you do a lot of crazy things. And I barely made it. I made it by 12 seconds.
Nice.
Nice.
So that gave me the confidence that okay, I can get through academy. Just need to build up my qualifications. There's no openings right now, but that's my next thing.
That makes
Awesome.
me it makes me worried because I feel like now I'm kind of seeing it. Like we have good people that get into politics for the right reasons because they want to help people, and then they see how the machine works, and they go, I could help people better if I was a frontline first responder, whatever it is. And then we lose a good politician that should be running for like
I'm
state
I'm
Congress.
I'm I'm still around. I will
Okay,
be running for all the
Good.
things. Don't
gotcha.
worry.
Okay. So real quick, the argument triangle. Okay, this is something I constantly am talking to Mr. Ducks about. Um, after the
Because I just
election,
want to yell at people.
no, but here's the thing: is do you want to yell at people or do you want to maybe change somebody's mind? And like if
Yeah,
I'm
I
if
know.
I'm going to talk to somebody on the other side, like my goal is to give them some info and at least make them maybe a little curious about what the other side's doing. And you got to approach it soft. And so, Obi, real quick, like the first week after the election, I got a phone call from Docs every night for like 7 straight nights at around 11:30 midnight, and he was enraged. He was amped up and enraged, and he's like, "I've been arguing with 3 different people through text all night," and I'm like, "Well, what are you telling him?" And then he'd read me some of his texts, and it'd be like, "How can you be this stupid as to vote for Trump?" It's like, well, if that's your opening line, you're not going to get anywhere.
Nah, it wasn't that bad, but
You and anyhow, your argument triangle video kind of it amazed me. Also, the mental models, I enjoyed that too. And if we have time, we can talk about that. But can you give us kind of a baseline of the argument triangle?
Yeah, so the whole concept of the argument triangle, and I learned this probably back in college, but I didn't use it until politics. So fast forward
Okay.
a long time later, because I realized pretty quickly when I first got on council, I think my first few months, I was really abrasive. you know, so I was like, no, let's break everything. Let's break it all. This is all bullshit. Let's break it all. And I didn't use my background, which is all those jobs I talked about. I was in strategy, strategic planning, and financial planning, and that planning mindset. I didn't apply it to the job. I just went in like a bulldozer and tried to change it all. and it wasn't very effective. So
Gotcha.
I took a step back and said, you know what, let's do this strategically. And one of the things I pulled out the dustbin, right, was this argument triangle that if more people used it, so just to backtrack, you know how we talked about politicians and how they don't know how to talk to people? One of those things that they don't do is build trust. The first step you need to do is build trust with them. And how do you build trust with someone? One of the components of building trust is building your credibility, right? So if you're not a credible witness or a credible messenger, then no one will listen to what you have to say anyway, no matter how well your argument is. So what the
Real quick, do
yeah
you think that finding common ground is kind of a way to build credibility? Like, hey, man, I also think that because that's my first lead in. Anytime we're going to do this, is hey, I know what you think about this. Like, I agree. I try to identify several areas where we are in agreement, and now let's start to broach into one where maybe we don't. I feel like that might
yeah
not be
yeah
for
that's a
one,
way
but
of so that's called like that's pulling down their defense,
okay,
right? So you want to
disarming.
find you want to disarm them first if they're really aggressive. And there are a lot of constituents that'll come to me and say something really aggressive, like, Obi, I can't believe you fucking did this, right? And they'll be doing this with their fists and I can't believe, and I have to disarm them. So one of the ways to disarm them and really just calm them down is to find that common ground and say, well, actually, I agree with you, right?
Perfect.
It takes them, it kind of backs them up, like, whoa, what do you mean? And then they're fully, then you have their full attention, right? And you have it without their anger, because anger really just it messes up your reasoning skills, right? So when someone's angry, they're not going to reason, meaning listen to your argument. They're not listening to your argument. They're too angry. They're flooded, right? So you have to get rid of the blood that's flooding through their veins,
Hmm.
calm them down, and then if they have an argument, um, so whatever the argument is, there are levels. So the argument triangle increases your credibility, first of all, and really creates a better conversation. Because what will happen is they usually will have, so some politician might say to me, well, no, Obi, I don't agree with you. You Democrats want to, um, all you want are hammocks, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to approach it. What the argument triangle does is it structures your thinking on how to approach it. The top three levels are the ones you want to focus on, and the bottom three levels are the ones you want to avoid. So the top one, the best way of refuting of winning an argument is to refute that person's central point. That's the sixth D6, I think it's called, right? That one is like you want to get to the core of what the argument is with evidence and reasoning.
And real quick,
So
what real
yeah,
quick, the biggest mistake people make there, in my opinion, is instead of, and this is both sides completely, but instead of refuting the argument and coming back with a counter, some facts, it goes immediately into whataboutism. Oh, well, Hillary was dirty
right.
too, or hey,
Yeah, so
they
right.
all lie, and
Yeah,
yeah.
the point of this is not to just spit data and facts about irrelevant, or about your own arguments. It's data that refutes their central point. So if they're debating healthcare policy, you want to show data that disproves cost claims that they're making, right? Very specifically. You want to get as specific as possible to what their core argument is, and then you shut it down with data. Shut that thing down with data, not your own, not prop up your own thing, but shut their thing down.
Okay.
That's the best way. That's the top. The second is called refutation. And that one is like using official statements or using quotes from opponents that demonstrate the inaccuracy with evidence, right? It's it's really effective because it exposes misleading rhetoric, right? You want to debunk false claims on tax policy, for example, by quoting legislation.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
quoting. You want to get down to the meat and potatoes of data versus someone's opinion.
Well,
That's the
here's where I
second
have
level.
an issue with some of that is where if I'm talking to like a right-wing person and I tell them, Trump's a rapist. Like that's one of the arguments I use for my dad. I'm just like, you're voting for a rapist. And
So,
like
uh,
and he gets kind of confused by it. And he's like, well, they always have an excuse, or it's always because the DOJ is against Trump. And I'm like, well, there's 12 people in a jury of 12 that convicted him of sexual assault. Like, and it just
So
never
here's the
goes
issue.
any further.
So here's the issue with that argument, right? The issue is, I mean, we all agree we shouldn't be voting in rapists, right? But if someone is a pro-Trump person, so they're already supporting him, right? And you want to say you're trying to make them more aware as to who they're voting for. You don't ever want to attack the person's character, like their identity or their character, because that person won't accept they won't accept that as a valid reason. Does that make sense? So, for
yeah.
example, if you say Trump is a rapist, but that guy may be voting for Trump because he thinks Trump will lower his taxes.
Yeah.
Get to the core of why he's voting for Trump first.
Exactly.
So first you
Mm.
ask him why. What is it about Trump that you like? Once he tells you, well, he's going to lower my taxes, then you attack that with that top point, the triangle, the top of the triangle. You go right, you refute the central point, and you say, well, actually, here's all this evidence that shows he's actually the worst possible candidate for lowering taxes on the middle class and lower class. Boom, 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 boom. That then that person is like, oh, I had no idea. And then maybe once they're disarmed with your data, right? That's actually a way of disarming them too. You disarm their central point, then they have nothing else to fall back on, and then they'll listen to you on the other stuff. Then you can say, oh, by the way, he's also a rapist.
Yeah, you sneak that in.
And then he's like, oh, yeah, we shouldn't be voting in rapists, right? That's how you convince those kind of folks.
Well, and real quick, if I had a list of like the different policies that I would try to, if I was going to persuade a Trump voter, like he's a rapist is at the bottom of that list. That's not what I'm opening with. The economy.
It was
what?
my last ditch effort on this.
Yeah. What? But like the economy, I really felt like this time, like every persuadable Trump voting person that I talked to, if I could get them to talk to me about the economy and what Kamala's plan was going to do for the economy versus what Trump did in his first 4 years and what it looks like he's going to do again, I could make some progress. I'm not saying I flipped many people, but I at least got them open to the idea. Even with immigration, I had one friend of ours, Docs, that his opening line was "Shut it the fuck down." Not another person crosses the border. And within 10 minutes, I had him going, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I guess if we did get rid of all the migrants, like produce prices would rise and construction costs and all. And suddenly he was like, well, we just need to make sure we know who's coming into our country. And I'm like, okay, right there. We can agree with that. Let's make sure that only safe people are coming in. The way you do that is through some border legislation, some immigration reform. And oh, by the way, Trump just killed that. They had a bipartisan bill that Trump told them to kill. That made progress with people. He's a rapist. He's a Nazi. He tried to, overthrow the government. Like, whilst many of those things could be true, you're not gonna make any movement there.
And that stuff is better for fundraising, right? So
Yeah.
Democrats will use that. Well, the problem with Democrats is they'll use it as their main argument, and then they'll use it for fundraising. It works for fundraising because your base, the Democratic base, who already believes that, they want to hear all the negative stuff, unfortunately, and that gets them spending more money. But those two levels, so actually the bottom three levels of the triangle are inclusive of the name calling and the ad hominem. So ad hominem is when you attack someone's character versus their argument, right? The issue with a lot of Trump voters is they don't have an actual reason why they like him. So that's why I always try to attack that first. So I ask a lot of questions when I talk to someone versus just telling them stuff. I'll just say, like, can you explain, like, why do you like Trump? And they won't know. They'll say something anti-Democrat, right? Well, I don't want Harris. Then I'll say, okay, why don't you want Harris? And most people actually still can't answer that, right? Because they're fed that from Fox News and they're fed that from the media. Don't trust, but once you get down to like, you have to force them to lock in on why they actually like him or why they don't like him.
Well,
And
critical
then
thinking
once
is
you have
hard,
that
right?
reason, it's really hard. But those are the levels to avoid. The other one to avoid is the level of the triangle is um when you focus on someone's tone. So if I make an argument and the person I'm arguing against is like, well, you don't have to yell. You're yelling the whole time and blah blah blah, and he's focused on my tone, on how I said it. That's usually a way of not winning, and there's no way you're winning that debate because people who are looking for a serious debate don't actually care about the tone and shouldn't care about the tone. You focus on the argument only, not the tone,
Hmm.
not what they're not, not anything else. So
Hmm.
it's a helpful tool, the triangle.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the name calling. So, Docs, I need to send you this. I think it was an Instagram post I saw that Obi did. I need to send this to you because the bottom three things on the pyramid are the things you're not supposed to do. And I feel
Yeah.
like when you talk to Republicans, you live in that bottom three. You never venture out of that. That's how
See,
your
now we're just
conversation goes.
beating up. Now we're beating up Docs, and that's he's
He
like, stop
deserves it.
beating me,
He
stop beating
deserves
me
it
up.
for this. I've witnessed him, and I think part of the thing I'm lucky because 97% of the people I deal with on a daily basis are Trump voters. Like I have one friend that recently was like, I don't think I could even be friends with a Trump voter. And it's like if I took that mentality, I would be a hobbit. I would not interact with anyone. So I've
Yeah.
got to get a lot of my friends here. I play disc golf with many MAGA type people, and it's all about finding common ground, like we said earlier. Um, but if I showed up and I did the whole like, I can't believe you're voting for a rapist or whatever it is, it's not going to go well, man. So
Well, that was my last ditch effort for my dad.
I think that
Like
was also your
I
first
started with
effort.
the question. I started with the questioning. I went through all that, and then it was just like, why are you voting for a rapist? And it was the one that hit the hardest for him.
Yeah. Well, and Obi, to go back to something you said, the most common answer I got, because I wasn't here in Oklahoma for the first Trump election. I got up here in 2021. So dealing with people that were Trump voters, I would say like, "Oh, you're going to vote for Trump," and they'd say, almost everyone said some version of, "Yeah, I don't really like Trump, but there's no way I could vote for Kamala or for Biden before that." And every time I would ask them, "Why couldn't you vote for Kamala?" The couple things they could list were things that were clearly shit they'd heard on Fox News or whatever podcast they listened to, or Newsmax now, OAN. But a lot of them weren't true. It'd be like, "Oh, because she's a communist," and I'm like, "Whoa, hold on, like." Let me find you 7 clips of her this week saying she's not a communist, like she believes in capitalism or whatever it is. Um, but there, it was. I'm teetering with this thing because I want to say like, hey, there's a lot of Trump voters that aren't bad people. They're just misinformed.
Mhm.
But I'm almost tempted to say that's a little too harsh. I want to say they're not bad people. They're dealing in a different information bubble than we are. Because I mean, it's what they're getting it all day long through social media, through YouTube, through the channels they watch. And they, as crazy as I've thought, like, man, I can't believe someone could vote for him with blah blah blah, whatever the issue is. And they think that we're equally crazy, and it's because we're in one information bubble and they're in a different one. And that's one thing I talk to docs about all the time. I watch a lot of Fox News. Like I watch a lot of right wing stuff for nothing else, just because I want to know where these people are coming from. Docs, you are someone who lives in the left wing echo chamber. I
No,
think,
I listen to a lot of right-wing stuff too.
yeah, I don't
I
buy
feel
it.
like you listen to like more of the centrist stuff, and I listen to both far right and left stuff.
I think the key thing is we got to find a way to break down that barrier where more people start hearing a little bit of what the other side has to say. That's my goal, and I don't know how we'll ever do it, but I feel like that'd be the first step in getting this shit fixed. I
Well,
don't
I
know.
think so one of the things that I hate the most in politics is the both sidisms,
Mm,
right? The both sides thing, where um, if Fox News says that aliens exist and one out of every three of your neighbors are actually aliens, right? And they say that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then a Democrat says, hey, you can't say that it's not true. There's a lot of people that will go to that Democrat and say, how dare you call out Fox News for saying this? What about you guys? You also you've said some crazy things, and they'll give an example of something that's actually like not a crazy lie is just debatable, right? And they'll say you have to make it balanced, make it even. Or they'll go to a Democrat station and say, you guys only talk about, boring facts. You should be elevating these liars over here. So some of these lying candidates, why don't you ever talk about them? Give equal time. So it's very dangerous for the optimism of, hey, let's have both sides listen to each other, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they should be. What I think is the actual issue or solution, or one potential solution, is elevating everyone's ability to reason. What we don't do very well is, and we don't teach this in schools anymore, right? I don't know if they've ever taught it. They should be, but they don't. And this is about, like, how do you find verifiable peer-reviewed journals and research and sources of data, right? How do you look at a piece of data and know that it's bullshit? Training people to become better thinkers and reasoners so that they can be self-sufficient in the information, because they're getting a lot of information, especially now that everyone's a journalist, right? Anyone with an iPhone is a journalist. So they're getting all this stuff from TikTok, and they don't know what to do. So they're believing everything. So I don't think we need to be giving them more of the right or more of the left. I think what we need to be giving them are tools that they could train themselves in and be like, you know what? 99% of you are bullshit because your source, because I saw your source and your source is not credible, it's not peer reviewed, it's not boom, 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 right? They don't have a tool belt of how to reason. So they're just collecting everything with no filters. So let's give them filters.
That's the hardest thing to do, real quick, is people tend to jump around, like, where if you finally kind of corner them on this and you say, hey, look right here, here's a fact, what you just said is not true, they'll immediately go, well, what about it? And they'll just switch topics. And it's so hard to, no, we're going to live right here on this topic and we're not going to go anywhere else till we get to the bottom of this. But it's hard to do. The other thing, real quick, the refuting it with facts is a great way to go about it. I've dealt with too many people recently where there's nothing I can show them. If I show them a scientific journal, they're going to say, oh, did you get that from doctors? Like, I'm supposed to believe doctors? Or, where'd you get that? Google? Or
scientists?
The mainstream media? Yeah. Oh, what? A scientist said that? You think I'm going to believe that?
You believe a scientist? No.
There's a certain group of people, and I want to say it's way more on the right than the left, but maybe I'm wrong. But there's a certain group of people where there's nothing I could produce factually to show them that they would believe, because we've hit that point of distrust, whether it be with the media, with science, with government. And how do you get around that? There's no, I can't refute it with facts if nothing I'm going to show you is something you're going to believe. At that point, that's almost like we should stop talking because we're wasting our energy here.
So I think that's where it comes in, where we have that centralized, at least the Democrats should be doing this, right? A centralized communication strategy that piggybacks that persuadable information onto viral content. Yeah. I think that persuadable information, the first round of this, the first phase of so what we're really talking about is how do you deprogram the crazy, right? That's really what we're trying to say. So I think the way to deprogram folks, the first thing, we need to centralize it all the shit, right? It's everyone in the Democratic side they're all talking out their ass and they're all saying different things, not coordinated. There's no central think tank telling Democrats how to think and behave at all levels. So they're all saying different things in different ways, and it is really not effective. So we centralize that, and we get them all saying the same things in the same way and onto viral content. But that content, that first phase needs to be this toolkit, this set of this teaching. So it's like education. How can you tell what's false and what's fake news and what's not? And we can do that in really viral ways really well if we had this centralized strategy, right? It's possible. And then we just basically go on this education campaign for probably a couple of years,
a couple of decades. I mean, it's going to be a while.
Where it should penetrate at least a few million, right? If everyone's singing the same tune, at least a few million. But that most things you only need a few people, and the network effect will handle the rest, right? If in your neighborhood, if we target 10 people out of 100 in your city, those 10 people know 10 people, and each person, the network effect will take care of the scale. But what we don't have is the content and the messengers. The content is easy to pull together. It's the messengers that will have to buy in that no, that this is what we should be doing. We need to deprogram before we can re-educate. First, we got to get rid of all the crazy shit.
Yeah, the deprogramming I think is going to be a long journey, if ever. Like I have people in my own life that I still hang out with all the time, and I just don't talk politics with because I'm like in my mind it's unfixable. Like this is what they think, and it's not what I think, and that's fine, and we can still be friends. But there's no way I'm pulling them back to my reality. Man, I'm not saying the real reality, but where I'm at, we're not going to see eye to eye on these things. And I hope I'm wrong, but I feel like we've lost a lot of people, and I don't see how to get that ball rolling as far as the deep programming goes. Messaging on viral content, I think would work. I worry because I don't know, I don't trust the Democrats to do good viral content. Kamala had her TikTok team that was doing, trying to do whatever the trendy video was. It didn't get any steam. I almost feel like we need I told Docs this a few weeks ago, but we need a Joe Rogan type figure on the left, someone who's already got a large audience and is willing to kind of start bringing on the Democratic congressmen, senators, whoever, and let Bernie talk. I was anti universal health care just as a longtime Republican. I couldn't stand the idea of free health care for everybody. I don't know why. I just didn't. And then I heard Bernie talk on Joe Rogan, and within that 1 hour episode, I was sitting here going, "Oh my God, why aren't we doing universal health care? Apparently, it's going to save us. It's going to save us billions of dollars. It's going to be better for everybody." But it's all because Bernie had the balls to go on Joe Rogan and talk about that. There's nobody like that right now that I could see like, oh, let's just start sending the left to this podcast or that podcast. It doesn't exist. That's the first step, and that's the hardest part is it has to be someone who
There's
really
a
has
handful of them. There's a handful. If you put two or three of the left-leaning podcasts together, you have the Joe Rogan audience.
I
The
don't know about
numbers.
that. I don't have the
Yeah.
numbers to back it up, but I disagree.
And then there's the other side too, right? So that's the online side. The other way of influencing people's thoughts is in person, right? So there are, especially on the right, where in your neighborhood, for example, you might have 10 people that you can't talk to, that you can't convince, right? But in every group, in every social group, there is a leader. And sometimes that leader is a religious leader, for example, right? Where imagine if we go to churches, if we go to where these people actually are, and we influence the community leaders, they will listen to that person. If that person's like, you know what, maybe they're right. Maybe we shouldn't, XYZ. I think that gets them thinking, oh, something's wrong. Why is Fox News telling me this and my pastor is telling me that? So I think that there are opportunities we just haven't explored them, and it takes leadership to actually pull this all together, right? But we have the same leadership everywhere, and it's not working.
Well, and real quick, you've mentioned the door knocking and meeting the people. I will say I live right outside of Tulsa. Tulsa is a great city, by the way. If you haven't been, I strongly recommend you come visit. But they just elected. I don't think it's the first ever black mayor, but we haven't had a black mayor in quite some time, I guess. A guy named Monroe Nichols. And the biggest thing, I was following local Democrats here during that last election, and so many of them that were working like on the outreach for his campaign were talking about knocking doors in Tulsa and how so many people said, I've lived here for 20 years and I've never once had a Democrat come knock on my door. And it turned out there was a lot of them in the suburb area around Tulsa that just Democrats weren't reaching out to at all. And they did it. They had a great ground game. And now we have Monroe Nichols, who I don't know. I'm going to say I don't know a lot about him, but I like what I've seen so far. And
that's how I won my first election.
Yeah,
I won that by knocking 11,000 doors.
Boots on the ground.
11,000.
Yeah.
And I did 7,000 myself.
How long did it take you to knock the 7,000 doors?
Well, I started door knocking April, and the election was November.
Okay.
Okay, so you just
So every week, about 100 or so,
love
sometimes
it.
Wow.
two. But 11,000, that was the most. And most people said the same thing. You knock on someone's door, they'll say, "Wow, I've lived here XYZ, and you're the first person to ever knock on my door." A lot of them were. So I targeted independents,
Mm.
whereas a lot of Democrats, they teach you actually. No one taught me this though, but they supposedly teach new Democratic candidates, hey, only target Democrats,
Activate the
right?
base.
Because activate the base.
Mm.
What I did was say, well, I'll let my volunteers activate the base, or the party, the county party, activate the base, right? I'm gonna just focus on independents and Republicans.
Mm.
I actually did a lot of Republicans because I knew this was a conservative city, and you cannot just ignore, whole population just because you have a fear that maybe they won't, that you're wasting your time. A lot of those doors I knocked, most of them were really nice. You know, they ask, "Hey, are you a Democrat?" I said yes, and they say, "Well, why should I vote for you?" And I tell them, "Well, I'm just like you. What's your vision for the city?" I barely talked about myself at all until they asked me. My only question at the door was, "What's your vision for the city?" And most people said no politician has ever asked me that question. What my thoughts are, and no one has ever knocked on my door, right?
And
Right, to do that.
there's something to that,
That's
having a genuine conversation versus knocking on their door, and when they answer, you give them your little prepared spiel.
Right.
My name is this, and here's what I want. No, I would, if somebody showed up and just genuinely had a conversation with me, I guarantee you that'd be way more impactful than if I let them give their 3 minute speech and hand me their flyer and okay, I'll see you later. So
Yeah.
good work.
So
yeah.
the campaign was just very personal. It was a very personal campaign. A lot of in person. We did town halls. We're everywhere too. We were spread out. We went to grocery stores. So we'd be in the parking lot of a grocery store, and so me and two volunteers with a table. I set up a table in front of our car, right, right in the parking lot, the parking spot where we're parked, and just stand there. And people would walk by to the grocery store and be like, so I had to sign Obi Ezeadi for a city council, and they'd say, "What's this about?" And I'll tell them, "Yeah, I'm running for city council," and give them the spiel, and they say, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure," and they'll take the flyer. But like, so we did stuff like that all over, and it wasn't. It seems like common sense, and they used to do that a lot more back in the day, in the
Yeah.
'90s and '80s. That was how people campaigned, was very personal. Now it's just so virtual and or mailers, right? There's a lot of mailers now, very impersonal.
Social
So
media
what I
posts.
think right, social media posts, and what I think we can start doing more is this personal, have a personal touch. Because if people don't trust you, if you don't trust someone that you're working with and you've never met them before, you're definitely not going to trust them, right? If
Oh
you
yeah.
never
Yeah.
even met them in person, like face to face, if you already don't trust the whole institution, you need to have that personal touch for you to actually start that process of trusting again. So that's what we did.
I love it.
Great.
All right,
Yeah.
we got just a couple minutes left. Obi, is there anything that you want to get out about either being a city councilman or anything that we didn't cover? Any plugs you want to get in?
No, I got no plugs, no speeches
Okay.
tonight.
You haven't written a book you're trying to hawk or anything like that?
Well, the one thing I want to do, I do want to say, is related to economic security. That is something that I've been focusing on, but I'm going to turn up the heat on the next couple of years.
Nice.
And I say that because at the city council level, there's an ideology that there are two different groups of people. One group says that city councils are only supposed to focus on roads and police, basically, right? The other group says, well, actually, there's a lot more than that as core services. But on top of that, if we want to talk about a thriving community, economic security, there's so many elements. There's housing, there's homelessness, there's childcare. There are things that people are hurting through that they can't afford, that city council could actually make a huge difference in, and work with county and state and federal when we need to. But we have money to do a lot of things directly, these other areas. So I've been trying to expand people's perspective on what city council can be, because a lot of cities are doing this around the country now. They're they're expanding their scope. And I think it's possible. We just need courage to do it. So if anyone's out there who is in the city and thinks about this stuff, I'm here to talk with you.
You got me fired up. I want to run for either school board or city council now. Like,
That's right. And run for office. Everyone run for office.
I love it.
It's easy. It's easy to do it. Just do it. Just
right,
give it a shot.
I'm going to do it. Oh, Obi, I honestly, I really hope we get to have you back. I'm also trying to plan a trip to come visit Docs in Colorado. So when that happens, I'm going to track you down. I have a 10-year-old daughter myself, my one kid. So I'm going to bring her, and we can just put the kids on the playground and sit back and hang out or something.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, great to meet you. Docs, thanks for setting this up. Great guest.
Yeah.
And other than that,
Obi, it was great, man. Always a pleasure. I'm sure I'll see you soon. We got to get out there and get some more photos.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
All right. See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.